Good morning. Hi, my name is Monica Moskal. I'll be introducing to you Jonathan Batchelor, who is defending their PhD dissertation today. Jonathan is a student of mine. I like to think he's also a friend. It's been going on to year 7, so we've gotten some time to get to know one another. So it's my pleasure to tell you a little bit about them. First of all, I want to welcome some guests in the room. There's some important people here, not just lab mates, but kin and family are in the room as well. So thank you. I know that this defense means just as much to you as it likely does to me, and I know you've been behind Jonathan this whole time. So Jonathan got their master's at OSU working with terrestrial LiDAR, and during that work they focused on 3D forest structure with TLS, which happened to be TLS, terrestrial laser scanning, which happened to be an area of expertise in my lab as well. So they ended up citing some of the work from my lab, and just being south of Seattle, showed up at my door one day and said, can I come to your lab meetings? I think was like the first ask, and Jonathan joined lab meetings and applied for a PhD. So that was about 7 years ago. He's literally on second month of year 7 of a PhD right now, ready to defend. Perfect timeline. The work that they did for their masters ended up being part of a documentary, part of Mountain National Antelope Refuge documentary. So check that out. So even then, you know, TLS, good habitat mapping tool. Jonathan started the PhD in 2017, along with at least one other person in this lab or in this room today. The first week that they showed up and sat at their desk, I showed them where the desk was, and then I gave them a whole bunch of parts in a cardboard box, which was a terrestrial laser scanner, and said, hey, put this together. And then I went to a conference, came back in a week, and they did. Soldered the whole thing, it was working, it was collecting data, so they passed. they were deemed as a handy individual in their lab, and they really have been a handy individual in the lab, soldering things, building out computers, building out 3D printers, always going that little bit of extra to do things, not just for themselves, but pretty much anybody that asks. So, and feel free to ask for 3D printouts of models. I think they'll teach you how to do that yourself now. Jonathan has taught almost every quarter that they've been a student here, so a lot of teaching, and I know many of you, especially those of you online, know them from their instruction. They were really the key individual when we went from our LiDAR class being a student project-driven class to a lab-driven class. Jonathan developed all of those labs, and then COVID happened, so they put those labs online, and then a year later, another student took on the course, but Jonathan worked very closely with Anthony Stewart, a lab mate, to rewrite all of those labs into our code. And that's just who Jonathan is. They help and work with anyone that asks. They're also an adjunct instructor at Western and Evergreen State. Because of all of these activities, they've received many awards. Two that I want to mention is the Outstanding Student Teaching Instructor in SES, Graduate Student of the Year in 2022. And then the John Pierce Outstanding Graduate Student in the Washington Cooperative Fish and Wildlife Research Unit for the work that's part of their PhD as well. All funded external work, by the way. They've presented at many conferences, including the Forest SAD conference in Berlin. And that's a shout out to students that work with me. I like when you go to an international conference, and I will work for you to be able to do that at least once during your degree. As Jonathan, what's required to be able to do that. Jonathan lives in a van. They like dogs. Can I say that? And while in school, they've continued to work with environmental and community groups in Seattle, quite extensively as well. Some really important and passionate work. So with that, I'll leave the podium for Jonathan Batchelor. Before I leave, there are mouse pads and stickers that are also business cards. These are, the neat thing about this is the scans on here, the picture on here is collected by Jonathan with terrestrial laser scanning. These are from the PFC, so help yourself a little thing to remember this day by. Okay, the stage is yours.
Right. Hello. So just jump in here. Thank you very much, Monica, for that introduction. And I'll jump right in. I have quite a bit to cover, and with seemingly separate topics, but I'm going to try to develop that unifying thing. But it is dissertation title: Fine Scale Remote Sensing of Forest Structure and Condition, with my committee members, with Monica Moscal being my chair, and then Andrew Hudak, Ernesto Alvarado, Hans Eric Anderson, and David Sheen, GSR. So, a quick roadmap of what we're going to go through today. So, general overview of the topic as a whole, the presentation of my 3 chapters that each represent a publishable unit, and 2 of the 3 chapters have already been published. So there'll be a briefer summary of the research contained within, and a slightly more in-depth conversation about the chapter that has yet to be published. It's probably 2 weeks away from submission. So also some of my summary of my work at University of Washington outside of my direct dissertation work, and then we'll have some questions as well. So some quick definitions when I'm talking about fine scale remote sensing, forest structure and condition. So what I mean by forest structure, arrangement and amount of above ground biophysical components present in the forested landscape. With the condition are characteristics of those biophysical components that are not directly related to that 3-dimensional structure. And probably the most important key here is what do I mean by fine scale remote sensing? So scale, we have spatial, spectral, temporal. We're really focusing mainly on identifying the tools to quantify change at a very fine scale at the ecosystem process level. And so that trying to synthesize that saying like quantification of vegetation in condition or structure at a scale that can directly measurement the phenomena or process of interest. And it kind of gets to this idea of derived versus direct measurement from remote sensing. And very quickly, with the sort of history of remote sensing, we have older Landsat imagery where we can derive a lot of information about pixel values. We can come down with that spatial resolution, Sentinel 10 meters, starting to get more information about what's present. We look at nape imagery, it's 1 meter, we can see, oh, there's 800%. So we're able to resolve more direct information from that imagery. Then we go up to something like airborne LiDAR, where we can have tons of information about the phenomenon, in this case, the buildings and vegetation that we're observing, but we're still actually missing quite a bit of information of what's possible. And so this is just an illustration of kind of what I'm talking about when I say fine scale, of being able to model individual branches, individual leaves, and actually derive direct measurement of what is happening at that level. And so with my research here, if broad focus to study scale of ecological processes and to quantify effects of change at the resolution with direct measurement is possible. That's very broad. It's articulated in a broad sense, which I think will become somewhat obvious in a moment here. But what the full focus of each chapter is kind of process, like what is the condition or structure at the core of the ecological questions I'm asking? At what scale can we actually observe that process? Where do those existing knowledge gaps exist with these questions? Like why? Like why would you do this? And then finally, hopefully trying to definitely outlining my contribution, which I think is incredibly valuable, and I hope you too as well. So how is fine-scale remote sensing addressed this identified needs? So the chapters within this fuel moisture content. This is a published chapter, which is terrestrial LiDAR intensity values to quantify moisture content. Habitat characterization. This is another published chapter, quantifying understory structure using terrestrial LiDAR and upscaling to a landscape using machine learning and airborne LiDAR. And then finally, fire effects. This is the yet to be published chapter, and this is 3D modeling of forest using photometric point clouds from multispectral terrain. So jumping in, chapter 1, quantifying forest litter fuel moisture content with terrestrial laser scanning. This has been published, and so I'll slightly co-authors in the room. So there is more of a brief discussion about it, but I invite you to go and check out the paper, which is accessible to everyone. But the core of the question, why moisture? So moisture is definitely a measurement of condition. Like how wet something is doesn't necessarily change the structure, but it definitely changes the condition. Moisture is extremely important for ignition behavior, ability to control. Moisture and fire obviously are directly related. And moisture levels are a major consideration for applications of prescriptions like prescribed burning. And if we were able to have a more rapid fine-scale quantification of moisture content that is across a spatial extent, we allow for better prediction of fire behavior and moisture gradients. So that's more than just a question of where is moisture related and how well it will burn, but where is staying moist and how does that relate to the 3D, the topographic microtopography, like what's happening in the processes below. So there's a lot more implications beyond just fire. And so yeah, this is the quantification of condition essential fuels. So that process that we're looking at here, you'll see this slide repeated multiple topics, is change in water content as fuel beds dry. Scales. What do we actually want to observe at this? We can get information from satellite imagery. We can also get information from like spot samples. But really, ideally what we would like is a continuous gradient of moisture levels across an area uninterrupted that's been directly measured, not just interpolated. And so we sample the sample size with like these 30 centimeters by 30 centimeter samples in sample trays. And some of the knowledge gaps here is fuel moisture sampling is often limited to spot samples and not that continuous mapping of moisture gradients. And that continuous sampling would allow for a true detection of changes in moisture across the landscape. And the contribution of this is largely a methods paper, but it's a creation of methods that allow for rapid sampling of fuel moisture via LiDAR. And then within a laboratory environment, and sort of setting some framework that we can then take out into the field. So very brief, the moisture reflectance of a material increases as the material dries. And these are spectral reflectance curves that were produced as dead plant material, senesced leaf matter, went from a fully saturated state to an oven dried. We're actually seeing this change in reflectance values, mainly focused, right at like around 1430 nanometers wavelength. And this is known. Like this is known, this is a part of indices like the Global Vegetation Moisture Index. So this relationship is known and is actively used. But what hasn't been fully explored is that a lot of terrestrial LiDAR uses 1550 nanometer wavelengths of light, which is right smack dab in that section. And so what is the capability of LiDAR, the amount of reflectance from the laser pulse? How does that change with synthetic materials driving beds as they drive? So this was a laboratory experiment. I had 4 leaf types: Doug fir, ponderosa pine, longleaf pine, southern red oak. A few control materials to kind of have a baseline with the angle of incidence related to intensity values, and 2 TLS scanners were used, a Faro phase shift and a Regal time of flight unit, and they both operated at that 1550 nanometer wavelength. And what this is telling you right here is that we have our sample types, the hour from fully saturated to oven dried that were scanned, locations, the distance increments, the angle, and overall, we've made 12,416 samples to drive our models for this research. That setup was those 1550 nanometer wavelength LiDAR units, and we had short scan time, rapid rotation of samples because they were drying. We're trying to model that drying effect. That we are designed to minimize time between scans as materials are drying. These are the scanners used right here. And this is just fun, like a photo of sort of the setup we had going on. I kind of liken it to, it was during the pandemic, so we had we had access to space and a lot of time. And so we just kind of really enjoyed building the sampling methodology. So from the terrestrial LiDAR scans, we pulled out a host of different metrics, and we've really found a very, very strong relationship between the mean intensity value and the standard deviation of samples per sample tray. And that is this relationship modeled as the moisture normalized TLS intensity values. So as that dries, so this would be drying or the moisture gradient, that's that pretty strong relationship. Other variables we tested that weren't as strongly correlated, but using a multiple linear regression of mean and standard deviation, we're able to model that relationship up to about a 0.98 R-squared value as far as the model, like overall accuracy. It definitely was variable though, and it wasn't a straight relationship of as moisture dries anywhere, this is the relationship. We did have to separate distance from standard as part of this to try and normalize the effect of the diminishing of energy as the laser light travels. And it was also not totally consistent across materials. So a summary table here, we're just paying attention to these green areas, which had that very, very high level of agreement for modeling using multiple linear regression. What's red here are typically like the Regal time of flight performed better than the Faro phase shift. And what that kind of actually means is I'm going to leave that to the paper for further exploration. The summary here is that the take-home message is that lasers can be used to quantify change in moisture. Mixed fuel beds will provide a greater challenge than our pure fuel beds that we've tested, and that relative changes in moisture are easier to detect than like an actual like value, like that is 30% moisture. And we've already taken this laboratory, these methods that were derived in the laboratory, we tried implementing them into the field, and there's some promise there. We just needed more time doing field work, which is probably the funnest part of any kind of research. But we have some preliminary results that do look fairly promising for the next step, in the research, taking these methods that we developed. For our next chapter, a little bit of a whirlwind here. Terrestrial and airborne LiDAR to quantify shrub cover for Canada lynx habitat using machine learning. This has also been published. And so once again, slightly more brief overview of the why in the research. And so why lynx, why terrestrial LiDAR? And these images are related to research. So this was lynx have very specific structure requirements. This was a photo taken of doing this field work, and I didn't actually mean to make a little animated GIF of it, but then it just happened to be on my camera, and I was like, that's cool. I like to use these examples of like terrible, horrible field work where I have to wander beautiful wilderness areas for my research. Oh, it's so taxing. But links have very specific structure requirements. Typically, like broadly characterized, dense and brushy understory. This is directly related to areas preferred by snowshoe hare. And this research is funded by the DNR. And I had some meetings with wildlife biologists, and like, okay, I want to know, understand the process or the phenomenon, the structure. What do we actually care about? And the biologists informed me, okay, so it's this layer, like 1.5 meters, 2 meters, like that shrub layer density is super important for snowshoe hare and subsequently to lynx. It represents like cover and forage, and like even in areas when snow cleared most of the ground. So it's like, okay, 1.5 meters above ground. And current sampling methods typically involve field crews, cover boards, subjective assessment of that horizontal cover well out in the field. So part of that question was, can we use terrestrial LiDAR for a more objective, rapid sampling of horizontal cover? And if that's possible, can we use that data to inform models to predict that cover across the landscape? So the process here, that our focal slide here, is change an understory horizontal cover across the landscape. The scales that we're looking at here, and the goal is the objective measurement of all including vegetation structure about 1.5 meters above ground. So if you're looking out, not necessarily just trying to infer it, but actually measuring it. That knowledge gaps is that there's not really effective methods to upscale plot samples to regional models using LiDAR data. It's like that. It's seeing more work to it, but modeling understory vegetation from vegetation structure from airborne LiDAR is notoriously difficult. Tree heights, a lot of information about biomass. A lot of that is airborne LiDAR is fantastic for, but actually, what is the structure on the ground is harder because of including vegetation above. Contribution of this research is that creation of methods to quantify horizontal coverage in terrestrial LiDAR, and then also the implementation of those methods to development of spatial models linking novel TLS metrics to novel ALS metrics, so terrestrial LiDAR to airborne LiDAR metrics to create regional models of understory vegetation cover. So once again, it's developing methods and then implementing them in this case to actually have a regional products. There's again my friend the Pharaoh tool of trade. So the study site here, sites within Washington, the DNR Links Management Area. This is the Loomis Forest and the Pend d'Oreille Forest, Little Pend d'Oreille. So Washington DNR, the site selection itself is based upon existing Washington DNR sites. They're part of the RS-FRIZ remote sensing forest informatics group DNR. So they already had these sites selected, measured, and then broadly characterized into young cover, low cover, mature, and normal. So we took that baseline information for our site selection. And overall, 42 sites were selected. Each site had 4 plots within it. And the sampling method of, I'm going to leave that more to the paper for y'all to further investigate. But airborne LiDAR is available for the entire area. And that core objective is to link those TLS field metrics to ALS data to provide a regional model for that understory vegetation structure. So this here, it's not LiDAR, it's an aerial image, but I do want to zoom in a little bit of the airborne LiDAR, like what it actually is in this area, and just describe sort of the core of the issue. So airborne LiDAR, it is phenomenal for so many things. The color here is applied by photographs that were also added. But when we get this regional information is fantastic. We zoom in and look at sort of understory with an airborne LiDAR. We see a lot of gaps happening. We try and pair up the airborne LiDAR with terrestrial LiDAR, and we're getting all that information about understory structure. And then so the question is, the problems is we have these beautiful 3-dimensional models of vegetation structure, but how we actually pull out these quantifiable metrics from it. And we tested, several different methods. I think we tried 42 different metrics from terrestrial LiDAR. What ended up working the best was this idea of sort of a digital cover board. So this is a depth map. So this is from that center viewpoint of terrestrial LiDAR, how far is everything, and is there something at each scan location? So we're able to set this sort of ribbon at 1.5 meters above ground, like do some sampling to get a resolution that's more meaningful, and say how much of this digital ribbon, this digital cover board, it actually has cover present to it. And very quickly, sort of what that looks like. This is one of our plots. This is a 10-meter radius clip of one of our plots with elevations. We remove the elevation, and then we can take a slice and look at just the point return of the structure available only at one level within that. So we looked at all these different metrics, voxel metrics, more specific depth and openness metrics. It's kind of what can we derive from these? So the first question with terrestrial LiDAR is all these 42 metrics that were derived, what actually accounts for that variation of observed differences in structure? And the principal components analysis of actually what of our metrics accounts for that variation. And so to infer from that, what metrics actually quantify differences the best. It was all voxels and the digital cover board method. So, and the digital cover board method was utilized through a process of elimination and experimentation with modeling. I'll show that over to the paper as well. So airborne LiDAR metrics. So airborne LiDAR it's a point cloud. You can do whatever you want with a point cloud. And so we had ranges of points, all point returns, returns only below 2 meters, point returns below 2, above 5 meters. We pulled out 284 different metrics of intensity and actual point location from airborne LiDAR to see what of these metrics is most important for development of accurate, high-performing models. And typically, it was isolating just the points 2 meters and below with an airborne LiDAR performed the best. And so, once again, through a process of experimentation with different machine learning algorithms, XGBoost outperformed the other modeling that we tested. And so that flow of that work is quantify areas of high versus low cover with terrestrial LiDAR, label airborne LiDAR data as high or low cover based on TLS metrics at those site locations, and separate the ALS data into training and testing data, and then run the XGBoost models formulated on the training data, and then apply the test, and then validate the models with the tested data. That's that machine learning sort of workflow. And of the 284 airborne LiDAR metrics, it was the points below the height of 95th percentile, points 2 meters and below, standard deviation of points, the intensity of those points in that lower sphere. So if the intensity values were fundamentally different for vegetation versus like rock or soil. And also using also information about overall point height and distribution of point values. Overall, it was like an 85% accuracy performing model of this, and separating out the Loomis forest alone. Incorporating both forests did degrade our model performance a little bit. So that take home here, the summary, and here is an example of that final model output of identifying high cover, low cover, and no cover being defined by areas that had no significant airborne LiDAR returns above ground. So that digital cover board from terrestrial LiDAR is a rapid way to collect data in the field to provide a more objective measurement of horizontal cover. And that XGBoost machine learning outperformed other machine learning techniques in developing these models. And that of the 284 metrics, we isolated only 5 metrics that produce these well-performing models, with that overall 85% accuracy as assessed by our testing data. Right. Our last main chapter here is that drone-based multispectral photometric point clouds can classify fire effects at different canopy height strata. Not yet to be published. This is question here, why fire, why using drones? So fire is absolutely a change in condition and structure. Drone digital aerial photogrammetry, DDAP, it's my preferred acronym. It's also more commonly referred to as structure for motion, the development of these photometric point clouds from triangulation of individual images. And for this, we use multispectral imagery to build multispectral three-dimensional models. And can we quantify fire effects on the canopy? So normal areas that are normally occluded, can we separate overstory from understory? So those processes that we're interested in is trying the vegetation at a 2 meter canopy height strata. So looking at point clouds and looking at different slices within that and saying, oh, how was the ground affected versus the overstory? And in addition, consumption of individual shrubs and vegetations in the understory. So scale at which that we try to quantify these values are fire effects. It's like a vertical continuum with these three-dimensional models from multispectral imagery, and 20 centimeter and 5 centimeter resolution ortho images that were generated directly from the point clouds, isolating the points of interest, creating ortho image frames. So some of the knowledge gaps that were addressed, assessment of influence of live canopy on estimates of ground fire effects. And also current inability to really quantify understory vegetation from overhead imagery. I mean, you can't quantify things when there's a tree blocking it, unless you get sneaky with drones. Well, there's other ways, but my method is sneaky with drones. So the contributions, creation of methods, once again, to separate fire effects in canopy versus ground, and a methodology of classifying ground cover under canopy using drone imagery. So the site for this research, Fort Jackson, 52,000 acres in Richland County, South Carolina, prescribed burning approximately 30,000 acres of its training lands every 3 years. That's all been put on hold due to the pandemic, but that was the schedule. And it's a longleaf pine forest with a dominant sparkleberry understory. Some of this research was somewhat opportunistic in taking advantage of these prescribed burns. So we had to make do with what was available to us as best as possible. And I think there's some really promising implications for future studies in some of these methods. Very quickly, DDAP acquisition. That's DDAP. You start saying it's my so drone imagery, RGB multispectral, flyer drone. You take photos. Each location, each photo is triangulated. Three-dimensional photometric point clouds are able to be generated, and within those point clouds, the spectral information from the parent photos is preserved. You use a 4-band multispectral image. Point cloud has 4-band points to create these multispectral point clouds. There's a large question here about effects of processing and quality control, which is addressed more in, well, it's just more in that we were making some assumptions about about the validity of the location of each point, because there's some disconnect with photogrammetric models. But the area, there are 7 plots in total between 0.2 hectares and 3.3 hectares each. All plots were flown twice before and after the prescribed burn happened. Of the 7 plots, 5 were burned and 2 were not burned. But they weren't burned, but they were still flown twice. And so we have these photogrammetric models, vertical strata, and we're able to isolate what's happening overstory, what's happening in understory, and there is some of that disconnection between, based upon sort of the limitation of the image we reflected. This is one of the future potentials and work of redefining that model generation. With the same thing, normalizing our point clouds, we're getting true height above grounds, and they were creating these 2 meter bins above grounds, with most trees in the area being below 20 meters in height. So multispectral photogrammetric point cloud can generate NDVI values for each individual point within that point cloud. conceptually just quickly what it looks like. Pre-fire NDVI normalized difference, the vegetation in the sea, post-fire, and just observing it, we're seeing that there doesn't seem to be that much change in the overstory here, but we're seeing quite a bit of change in the understory. And a lot of that understory change is normally occluded by the overstory vegetation. Yeah, 2 meter strata points and able to separate those ground values from the overstory. And what that looks like, sort of plotting it out, is here is violin plot. Here we have the green is before the burn, and this is the ground level upper canopy here. Each of these represent one of the 2 meter height strata, and you can see this very pronounced drop here, up to 6 meters in height, with the burned areas. Our sample sizes, for example, here, we had 2 million points. So tests of significance for difference in mean values, everything is a significant change when you're dealing with sample sizes so large. So how do we kind of quantify that in a more meaningful way? And settled on Cohen's D to quantify the effect size, from like small effect to very large effects. And so we're seeing a very large effect size below 6 meters in the burn plots, kind of reaffirming that idea, that concept of the overstory is relatively untouched, and the understory was highly impacted. And now we have a way of actually visualizing and measuring that. And only small or very small effect size observed in the control plots. And this is what that slicing sort of looks like here too. It's represented with these violin plots, the change in the vertical extra. So creating those images from the point clouds, we have this is false color, near infrared imagery of the plots here. So before the burn, after the burn, before the burn, after the burn, overstory included, overstory excluded. So this is just the ground. So all of the overstory vegetation is removed and still able to generate this complete coverage imagery of multispectral ortho images. So kind of talk about it. This is like in this vernacular here, understory only. So removal of above ground vegetation or the overstory, top down being a true ortho image of what it looks like looking straight down, and also isolating only the trees themselves. And this next analysis is carried out on the pixels of the ortho images and not the individual points. So what does the actual imagery give us as opposed to trying to isolate individual points? And 20 centimeter resolution multispectral ortho images and 5 centimeter resolution RGB images. And take a minute here to walk through this, but this is the burn plots and the control plots, with the scatter plots being matched pixels. So it was, what was the behavior of this pixel, this 20 centimeter section on the ground, or the canopy, this 20 centimeter section from the ortho image? What was its its NDVI value, its reflectance before the burn and after the burn? And so if there's little change, the points will be clustered around this 1-to-1 line, and you can kind of see that present in the control plots. We're also seeing this phenomenon that we're having the understory only and the tree only pixels are really separating out from each other in two distinct clusters of change. And then when points are up in this upper left-hand quadrant here, that is when they are to the upper left of the 1-to-1 line, there's been a decrease in the NDVI values. Looking at these density plots, density probability plots, the mean values are the dotted lines. We're seeing that the pre-burn, we're seeing this pretty consistent distribution of the NDVI values within the imagery. And then post-fire, there's a very distinct difference of the understory versus overstory pixel values in quantifying that change that was present. And once again, using the Cohen's D as a measurement of effect size, there was that very large effect size looking at only the understory, and then a small effect size when looking at top-down imagery or tree-only imagery. So once again, it's that separating out of the understory fire effects from the overstory fire effects. And the last little bit of this research was, okay, so we have this 5 centimeter resolution understory images with RGB imagery, the upper canopy just removed. You can also classify vegetation, like what is actually present in that understory, and actually also modeling the exact extent of the overstory location. So where is the overstory exactly with the trees? So everything that's shaded here would normally be occluded, and we're still able to classify the vegetation cover in that change. So what burned where is at a centimeter accuracy. And also canopy extent mapping. And this classification, overall accuracy at like 87%, like doing a stratified random sampling and accuracy assessment. And that last component. All right, so we've established the ability to separate fire effects from overstory, understory. How does this relate to like satellite imagery or imagery that's purely limited to that top-down look? But just visually, we have the drone imagery, and this is what the Sentinel picked up and what Landsat imagery picked up of change in that same area. And we have that this change. This is the drone imagery understory only of the post-fire, pre-fire. The DNDVI, so the difference normalized vegetation indices. We're seeing a huge change when we're looking at only the understory. We're seeing relatively minor change when we're looking at top-down drone imagery. So we're including that overstory, and then including the overstory from Landsat, we're seeing really no significant difference. Whereas Sentinel imagery is able to still pick up a sizable effect size of fire overall, but it's still the effect size measured by isolating the ground only with drone imagery was twice as large as the effect size observed when looking at the Sentinel imagery. So in summary for this, another terrible field photo, flying drones in burned areas. The summary is that DDAP can be used to quantify fire effects at different canopy height strata. Overstory vegetation can be digitally removed to quantify change in the understory only. As perhaps as distasteful as I like it, a peaking cat, it's like a digital clear cut. We're able to isolate only the vegetation under the upper story canopy. And that satellite imagery is influenced by the inclusion of live grounds when quantifying fire effects to much more of a degree than we're able to isolate overstory, understory with drones. And there are many new research opportunities I feel that this offers. Development of methods like assessment of ability done, send off to publication very soon. Just some small housekeeping things until that happens. Implications before we've measured effect size with Cohen's D. Is effect size, can we relate that to the likelihood of later tree mortality, of leaves drops? Can we use centimeter resolution understory classification of vegetation to say exactly where were those high intensity burn areas with logs and what vegetation was growing back based upon the centimeter resolution fire mapping intensity underneath overstory canopy? So I'm pretty excited about the implications of this research and future research possibilities that are related to this. I'll be out there. Happy drone flights. So overall, 3 topics, seemingly desperate in time and scope. I think there's that absolute unifying theme of what ecological processes are happening and how can we measure them at a scale that is most appropriate to actually quantify that change. The unifying theme, at the core of this dissertation, utilization reminds me of what I just said. I got to look at this. To address ecological questions in an interdisciplinary manner and to develop and implement novel methods addressing the existing knowledge gaps. That's what I hope I had converted to. Beyond the research that was in my dissertation, I've had 5 publications so far while I've been at University of Washington. These 2 are what we talked about. I have 3 other ones. that still work at this level of assessing scale and ecological process quantification. And beyond research, it's very important to me that teaching really has been about as much focus as research in my time at the University of Washington. As Monica mentioned, I'm currently an adjunct at Western Washington University and Evergreen State College. I did a little blanking on the word. I did a little tally of the classes I've taught, and it's 16 unique classes at 3 institutions. I've had 1,400 students so far, and I'm pretty excited about that. And one of the things, the hallmarks of my teaching, because I freaking love terrestrial LiDAR, I love like nerding out with students, is I have a collection of class LiDAR pictures. But I didn't realize that I was going to be developing this like portfolio when I started doing this. But now I have like an archive of classes I've taught in 3D. It's scheduled to make a new one this Thursday. And I just like, these are some of the classes I've been really involved in the course development. This core right here, I'm like the lead faculty developing a GIS certificate program at Evergreen State College. Like, we developed all of these classes as part of a continuous sequence there. And finally, I think those of us are finishing up now, we're like PhDs, so a pandemic PhD. And one thing that really taught me is the teaching at the onset of the pandemic. Yeah, it really taught me a lot. And Monica did touch on this. And it really taught me the importance of kind of like meeting students where like they're at. Like, there's no one learning style. There's no like one way people best engage with materials. And so I had to develop tons. And I actually looked back at my old Facebook from 2020. Oh man, just finished my final recording for all my students. 10 lab sections of teaching LiDAR processing online. Several hundred pages of lab materials written, 15 hours of recorded lab presentations. And I know I'm not unique in that. Like, everyone teaching had to go through that at that point. But it was kind of like, okay, just started teaching, and now we have this pandemic thing happening. What are you going to do about it? So it was extremely like influential in like how I've developed and continue to implement this multimodal learning styles. And finally, thank you to everyone in the room. Everyone who's ever answered my questions, knocking on doors, random showing, hey, we met twice before, but you did this cool thing. Like, can you help me with that methodology? Or in Monica's case, hey, you want me as a PhD student? You never met me before, here I am on your door. I'm just gonna stick around and tell you, like, let me in. Everyone who's taught and mentored me, to all my own students who have trusted me to teach them. And the list is far too long. If I tried listing everyone who was meaningful in this process, then we would have another 45 minutes. But especially thank you, Monica. And did acknowledge some of the fundamental, the core funding sources for this research, the CERDEP program, the 3D Fuels program, the Fire Lab here, Department of Washington DNR, and of course, Rascal and the PFC. And also, I guess as a reminder too, like, my philosophy is never take yourself so seriously that you can't kind of see the joy and humor in your research and presentations, or your presentations that you give during your dissertation. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was great. Thanks for giving us beyond just the research and what a PhD provides and means to the students. That was great. We have a little bit of time for questions. I will moderate